Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 502 for the 17th of Nissan in a regular year. So before I started running my own business, I had a lot of different jobs. And one of the jobs which I had was actually to be a gym teacher at Beis Rivka. And this was actually probably one of the most difficult jobs that I ever had. I taught gym to grades 5 through 8, and it was really, really difficult. Not because putting together the curriculum was so difficult or anything like that, but what was really difficult about it was merely just getting the girls to pay attention, getting them to even getting through like roll call was really difficult, getting them to stand in a straight line, getting them to follow any of my instructions. It was really, really tough. And unfortunately, one of the reasons why it was so difficult is because I was new to teaching. I hadn't really taught this age group before, especially not in like a school setting. And so I was not so familiar with how things need to go in order to make everything run smoothly. So I made the grave mistake on day one of teaching of being too nice. So I came in with a big smile on my face. I was really nice to all the girls. I gave them personal attention. I was really warm. Big mistake. Because as I learned, and as many teachers told me afterwards, this is the exact opposite of what you need to do. You need to come in on the first day being really strong, being really cold, not smiling at all, and that's the way that you can gain their respect. Only in that way will they come and listen to you. And later, once you've earned their respect, they have that fear instilled within them of you, then later, as time goes on, you can start to show them a little bit more of a warmer side. You can start to loosen up a little bit. You can begin to smile and become friendly. But if you do that right in the beginning, then they will think of you more as a friend rather than a teacher, and they won't respect you and they will rule over you, which is really sadly what I learned. Eventually, long story short, I did eventually gain somewhat of their respect back. I was able to retroactively learn how to be a little bit tougher and a little bit meaner to them and things like that. And it actually did work. And I did end up being able to control the class, but that's a subject for another time. So why am I talking about this? Why am I talking about my experience teaching gym at Beis Rivka? Because it really relates to what we're going to be learning about today. So we're learning a new chapter in Likkutei Amarim today, chapter 41. And the subject of today's episode is exactly this idea that while we've been talking a lot about loving God and fearing God and how both of these are really, really essential if we want to have the optimal type of service of God, if we want our service to really become elevated to the higher realms, we need to start with fear, interestingly enough. And this might seem somewhat counterintuitive because it might seem like the main goal, like when we think about really serving God in a real way, it might involve a lot of love and connecting to God in this really loving way. But what we'll learn about today is that it actually has to start with fear, or another way to translate is awe. So the word for fear or awe in Hebrew is yira, which is actually related as a side note to the word for seeing, interestingly enough. And the terms fear and awe, they're sort of used interchangeably because they are related and there are also different levels of this yira. So this is where the English translation can kind of be a little bit tricky, because when we think of fear and when we think of awe, they can like kind of connote very different things. So let's get straight into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains this, and then maybe we can chat a little bit more at the end and bring it back into my gym teaching analogy. So the Alter Rebbe says that, however, a person must always keep in mind and remember that what is the beginning of service and its main thing and its root. Like, what is the main aspect of service? And that even though we know that that yira, that again fear or awe, is the root for moving away from evil, like staying away from doing things that God doesn't want us to do, and love is the root of asetov, of doing things, of the positive commandments. Nevertheless, it's not enough to just arouse love on its own for doing those things that in order to propel us to do the asetov, the positive commandments. But rather, at bare minimum, we need to first arouse our innate fear, which is found in the inner recesses of our heart, of the heart of every Jew, so as not to rebel against the King of all kings, namely God, as we talked about above. And we need to arouse this fear so that it becomes revealed in our heart or in our minds, at least. So again, this is referencing to something we learned a few episodes ago about this idea that either when we serve God, we can either tap into this more innate love and fear that we have, which will lead to an intellectual kind of like recognition that we need to serve God, or we can come to start with the intellect and come to an intellectual understanding of God through intellectual contemplation and meditation, which will lead to this deeper feeling of passion within our hearts. And so we talked about that in relation to love and fear of God. So here we're specifically talking about the fear of God and how this applies to the fear of God. So again, so in the fear of God, there's the level of having it be being revealed in our hearts, which comes from that more intellectual contemplation and meditation, or where it just becomes revealed in the mind. So we don't have this passionate fear of God, but we do have this like understanding that we need to fear God, and that comes from tapping into our innate fear of God. And that's kind of like the bare minimum of what we need. And this will lead us to have like this like understanding in our thoughts about the greatness of God and about God's kingship, how God is the king of all the worlds, whether it's the higher realms or the lower realms, and God fills all the realms and God surrounds all the realms. In Hebrew, the terms for this is memale kol almin and soviv kol almin. These are two terms that come up a lot in Chassidus. We'll definitely talk about them more as we get further into Tanya. As is written, and here the Alter Rebbe cites Yirmiyahu chapter 23, verse 24, where it says, Halo et hashamayim v'et haaretz ani maleh, meaning, do I not fill the heaven and the earth? So meaning to say that, again, alluding to this fact that God is everywhere, he's in the heavens and in the earth. And nevertheless, so this great God, which fills the entirety of heaven and earth, he leaves aside the supernal realms as well as the lower realms. And instead, he comes and he connects his kingship to his nation, Israel. And not only to his nation Israel in a general sense, but to you, to every single individual. And this is why every single person needs to say that for me, the world was created. And that is a citation from the Mishnah, Sanhedrin, from chapter 4, Mishnah 5 of Sanhedrin, which says, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, for me, the world was created. So every person needs to really see it as if the entire world was created for them, and to see God in this really personal way, and to receive upon themselves the yoke of heaven, to see that God is their individual king, and to serve God and to do God's will in all different types of service, like the service of a servant. So now going back to my intro, continuing with my experience teaching at Beis Rivka, one thing that I really learned how to do, in addition to not being too nice, at least in the very beginning, is to not leave the classroom for too long. And when I say for too long, for literally more than 5 seconds. When I would leave even just to go to the bathroom or something like that, I would come back into the room and the room was just chaotic. I'm not exaggerating. The somehow all of the gym equipment that was stored in the closet was literally all over the gym. Girls were jumping on basketball hoops. It was just insane. It was really insane. And you know what comes to mind in this phraseology, and you'll see why I'm talking about this in a second, is the phrase, when the cat is away, the mouse go out to play. So as wild as the girls were when I was in the room teaching them or trying to teach them, it got way worse when I left the room, when there was no teacher in the room. Like that's like total freedom. The teacher leaves the room, you can do whatever you want, And so why do I bring this up now at this part of the Tanya is because, going online with this idea of fear and how to generate this fear or awe of God, one thing that we need to recognize is the fact that God is always in the room. God never leaves the room. So even though sometimes it might feel to us as if God left the room, so to speak, God forbid, we don't feel God's presence imminently in our lives in a perceptible manner. The truth is he's always here. He's always very, very much present in our lives. And when we really cultivate this recognition, this itself can help us generate this fear, this awe of God. And now we'll see that the imagery that the Alter Rebbe uses here is not a gym teacher, but he's actually going to give an example of a king of flesh and blood. That one way to cultivate fear of God is to really imagine how you might feel in the face of a king of flesh and blood. So nowadays, most of us can't really relate to the idea of a king, unless maybe you live in England and the royalty is still a thing over there. But here we can think of it in terms of maybe even politicians nowadays. We don't really give that much credence to. But nevertheless, whether it's the president of the United States or somebody who is really, a billionaire that you really look up to or something like that, maybe for some of you it's Elon Musk or whatever it is, somebody that you really see in a very high way. Imagine how you would act if they were to walk into the room and how you would behave if they were to walk into the room. So with God, all the more so is that the case, that all the more so that we, a way to cultivate this appreciation that God is really here all the time and he's never not in the room, so to speak, is to really think about try to cultivate a flesh and blood image in that way. Not to say that God is a flesh and blood, but it's something that we can kind of relate to. So the way that the Alter Rebbe explains this is going back into the text, where the Alter Rebbe brings up a couple of citations. The first one is from Breshis, chapter 28, verse 13, which says, Vehina Hashem nitzav alav, which means, and behold, Hashem stands over him. And then the second citation is from Yeshayahu, chapter 6, verse 3, which states, Melo chol haaretz kvodo, that the entire world is filled with his glory. So the Alter Rebbe begins with these two citations to really illustrate that this is really the truth, that God fills the entire world and God does stand over each and every one of us. And God is scrutinizing his kidneys and his heart. So obviously, this is meant in a more figurative way, that God basically sees the inner workings of who we are, like our inner intentions, what's really going on the inside. Is a person serving God properly? And thus, we really need to stand in front of God with a sense of reverence, a sense of ema in Hebrew, and yira, and fear, like awe, as if you were standing in front of a king. And to really deepen in your thought this idea, and to really lengthen, think about this at length, according to the understanding of your mind and in your thoughts, according to the amount of time that you have. Like if you have spare time, you should really use that time to really think about this and think about God before you involve yourself in Torah study or in doing a mitzvah. Like, for example, before putting on your talis and tefillin, if you're a guy, obviously. And so that's actually the end of the section. So just to recap, so basically the Alter Rebbe is just making this really practical for us here, this idea of cultivating this fear and awe of God. He's saying that the way that we can do this, and what we really should be doing, is we really should be cultivating this sense of reverence, of awe, of fear of God, the same way that we would if he were a king of flesh and blood. And we should do this according to the ability of our mind, and to do it at length, and really to do it in depth, according to the amount of not only our intellectual capacities, but the amount of spare time that we have. We should really use the spare time, especially when it comes to right before learning Torah or before we do a mitzvah, to really try to cultivate this sense of awe of God. So once again, to bring it back to our analogy of when the cat is away, the mice come out to play. In our case, the cat is never away. And we have to really remember that. Even if we may not see the cat with our physical eyes, the cat, quote unquote, is always there. So that's it for today, and we will continue along these lines tomorrow, and I'll speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.